Rally fans might remember the turn of the millennium as the height of manufacturer participation in WRC, with such manufacturers as Toyota, Ford, Citroën, Hyundai, Subaru, Mitsubishi, Peugeot, Seat and Skoda all competing in the championship. Some might turn back the clocks even further. If you go back another 15 years to the height of Group B, you'd also see teams like Audi, Lancia, MG, Opel, Porsche, Mazda, Nissan, Renault and Volkswagen all competing for honours. However, today's lineup looks really different, and even though the first four manufacturers I mentioned are the ones competing today, even their makeup's changed. Toyota Gazoo Racing, for example, is a project that's around 5 years old, and actually has more in relation to somewhere like Rally Art than it does to the old Toyota Team Europe, with Mitsubishi then driver and four-time world champion Tommy Mäkinen at the helm. In fact, Toyota Team Europe could arguably be closer to what the Hyundai Motorsport platform was when they returned to the sport in 2014. Very different in the Alzano-based team to their old kind of lineup. Likewise, Citroën have changed a couple of times as well. They've taken sabbaticals out to develop the C4 and C3 World Rally cars. The only team that has been competing in the entirety of that time has been M Sport, and even then they did 4 seasons without Works Ford backing. In this video, I'm going to be exploring the changing nature of the WRC, how these teams ended up leaving, what the WRC could do to win these teams back, and whether or not it needs more manufacturer teams. As we've seen over the past few decades, there have been a lot of different reasons why manufacturer teams choose to leave the WRC. Maybe it's a costly scandal. Maybe it's a change in focus to another competition. Maybe it's a change in the regulations in the WRC. For others, it's more of a competitive nature. With Peugeot, they saw PSA stablemate Citroën performing so well, and the increasing costs of the team, they decided to pull out at the end of the 2005 season. Likewise, Skoda would gradually reduce its program until it found a stable footing as a competitive force in other support and feeder series. Over the period of 2005 to 2008, the WRC lost to 3 Japanese teams who were competing: Mitsubishi, Subaru and Suzuki. The latter two withdrew at the end of 2008 as the global recession hit. This is especially hard-hitting when we consider the dominance that these teams had over the course of the late 90s and the early noughties, with Subaru and Mitsubishi picking up 5 consecutive drivers' titles and 4 consecutive manufacturers' titles, as well as further drivers' titles in 2001 with Richard Burns and 2003 with Peter Solberg, the most recent of which being the last one not won by a Frenchman named Seb. This meant that in 2009-2010, the only teams with a works entry were Ford and Citroën. In 2011 and 2012 they had Mini, who were operating on a part-time program. But it wasn't until 2013 when Volkswagen returned, and 2014 with Hyundai's return, that we saw full-time entries competing against M Sport and against the Citroën World Rally team. However, this came at the cost of privateer teams in WRC. As they grew over the course of the late noughties, the increasing costs and changes in regulations meant that they had to fold, as I've talked about previously. In fact, it's got to the point where it's almost impossible to run a private works outfit for a full season in the WRC. The closest we saw come to it was Mads Osberg and Martin Prokop in 2017. There are many ways in which the WRC can stimulate more manufacturer interest. Most of these involve cutting the cost, such as shorter events. Now, not necessarily in terms of distance, but when a WRC promoter asked teams how they could end up expanding the calendar to say, the manufacturer teams replied by saying that they needed shorter events, but in terms of time length. This meant that they could save money on logistics and running costs whilst away, and especially in locations such as Argentina, Chile and Australia, where there are large shipping costs involved. Lower fees. Now, this might not be something that exactly affects major WRC teams, it's something that moreover affects privateer teams. However, it could be something that ends up meaning that a small manufacturer makes the decision to not or to compete in the WRC. And it's especially prominent given the fact that lower fees or discounted fees or removed fees are part of a prize pool for winning championships such as WRC2, the former WRC3, the Junior WRC, as well as other kind of regional series like the ERC. It could be something that's quite important. A cost cap. Now, WRC has gotten exceptionally expensive, as we've seen with the ongoing war between Hyundai and Toyota, where they're both spending tens of millions of dollars trying to one-up each other in very, very minuscule ways. It means that it ended up pricing out teams such as M Sport, where Malcolm Wilson's trying to recruit the funding to get Oyt Tanak. However, Toyota and Hyundai are able to throw much more money at trying to secure a contract with him. Whilst this has been a debate in Formula 1, it's not really been something focused on in rallying. However, it could be effective. A cost cap means that manufacturer teams can't spend excessively on their teams, which means that a smaller team or a smaller manufacturer who wants to commit maybe about a fraction of the current cost that Toyota and Hyundai are putting in can actually do that. They can end up with a bit less of a kind of startup capital and a bit less funding to be able to keep the team going, but they'll still be able to be competitive. However, there is one factor which is probably more important than any of these, and that is car costs. I alluded to Group B at the top of this video, and it wasn't just because of the fact that the current generation of World Rally Car both inherits the looks and the power of these mighty, mighty machines of over 30 years ago. They also inherit the astronomical running costs of Group B and the even more ludicrous Group S. On the other hand, the R5 formula used in WRC2 and other regional championships offers a much more kind of cost-cutting measure, meaning that teams are able to compete and they're going to be able to have a car that ends up costing a lot less, and it means they're also going to be able to have a lot lower running costs, because you're not going to be spending a whole ton of money when some fancy aero goes flying off the car, as it invariably will. It's much like comparing Group B to Group A, or the early WRC formula to the kit car. And there is already a lot of manufacturer interest. 3 of the current 4 teams in the WRC all have massive programs for R5 cars. The only one that doesn't is Toyota, but they've currently got one in development. Outside of that, you have Skoda with a massive kind of program in Skoda Motorsport in the R5s. You have Volkswagen, who have entered a couple of events as Volkswagen Motorsport, but they're moreover selling it to privateers. You have Peugeot, who at the early end of the R5 period were using the 208. You also have these kind of smaller independent ones. You have the Proton-backed Iris. You also have the Mitsubishi Mirage R5, which is so close to homologation but isn't yet able to compete. And you also have the Toyota Etios, which is used in South America, another kind of independent build. It could massively stimulate manufacturer interest if the WRC picked this option. Also, if they twinned it with things such as a cost cap or lower events, it means that teams would be able to enter, they'd be able to have lower kind of startup costs and lower running costs if they wanted to compete to the WRC, which is what actually ends up enticing a lot of manufacturers into the sport in the end. So let's get into our final little bit, a debate of does the WRC need to do this? Now, I remember 10 years ago when we only had 2 manufacturer teams, and I think the number of 4 that we have today is actually quite a good one, though I could always welcome a couple more. The 2022 regulations, for example, which enable hybrid power, might be something that entices a manufacturer to join. However, it was a measure moreover implemented to keep the current teams in the sport, Citroën obviously the most prevalent. But we also have to think about the picture of competition. Whilst it would be nice for the WRC to have 15 full-time entries, for example, it's not exactly fun if only 3 of them show up to an event with a chance of winning. So we're probably too late to implement any kind of radical change that will have a massive influx of manufacturers in time for 2022. However, the next batch of regulations in this cycle will probably be around 2027, and there are a few ways the FIA could potentially stimulate more manufacturer interest. One is by moving over to the R5 formula. The other is by adapting this kind of formula, as we've seen a couple of times, to make sure that, there's going to be more kind of hybrid elements or potentially a full electric series further down the order. That could make more teams who want to make themselves appear more as a kind of eco-friendly manufacturer, ones that want to be able to prove themselves as something that has made a car that can last, want to compete in a series like the WRC. And, well, that's that for this video. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. I want to thank you so much for joining me in this video. It's taken a bit of a while for me to write this, and a bit of a while for me to make it. And watch out for in the next couple of weeks, because I'm planning on doing a calves column on this. This is something I did for the last video, which I'll link in the description below, where I was talking about how F1 could learn from rallying with a solution to the driver market. Essentially, I might write a little 500-word bit where I'm talking about some of the aspects that I left out of the video, or some of the aspects in the video that I wanted to flesh out a little bit more. So you'll find that in the comments below when it's written. I'll pin it to the top. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye bye for now.